Hi everyone, this is audap. Let's continue our game of Raging Loop, running on the PlayStation 5.
ちなみにちえみちゃんはそういうの気づいてるのかな。
そりゃそうじゃない。でも相手にしてないし脈はないね。
Man, this kid was harsh.
つうわけでよかったな。知恵ねえは発散のものだ。
いやー、どうかな。っていうか君はそれでいいのかい。
なんで聞くかな。
いや、短期間の観察ではあるけど、君は奔放なくせにはるちゃんに対してはどこか海外しい感じがして。
まあ多分そんなんじゃないな。幼なじみとして危なっかしいから心配してるだけさ。
意外だなモッチー。そういうやつをからかいまくるキャラかと思った。
発散だったら死ぬほどおちょくるけど、やっすんには借りがいっぱいあるし、はるちゃんはかわいそうな子だからな。
なんかいっぺんにいろいろ聞くのもあれだし、それはいずれ別の時に聞かせてくれ。
は、すでに喋りすぎた。何の魔術だ発散目。
He was the one who'd gone babbling on his own.
ところでさっき死んだって言ってたけど、誰か死んだの？いや、記者さんは亡くなったけど。
Yasumizu人はまだ死んでないけど、死んだも同然だろう。
ん？なんでそう思ったの？
さあ、なんでとかは僕には分からんけど、なんかね、匠兄がヘビだって言った時嫌な感じがしたんだ。今狼様が笑ったなーって。
待て、今なんて言った？
狼様が笑ったなって。
その前だ。
匠兄がヘビだって言った時？
匠さんがヘビなのか？
そう言ってた。
ちょっと休養ができた。またなモッチ、おじいさん。
狼が来るだ。
知ってたのか？
はあ？
Shit, I didn't have the time, nor the connections.
ムロさん。
あ、なんだ。
That was my line. Why was he farming at a time like this?
鍵ありがとうございます。
ああ、それはいいけど、あんま一人でうろつくなよ。ただでさえみんなピリピリしてんだから。
そのことですが、ムロさんは狼が一晩に何人殺すか知ってますか？
ちえみのやつ、そんなことまで喋ったのかよ。
僕が無理に聞き出したんです。というか、話が伝わることはあなたも予想した上でちえみちゃんに任せたはずだ。それでも情報は断片的ですが、ちょっと心配があるんです。すみませんが教えてもらえませんか？
ああ、実のところな、俺はバカらしいんだよ。こんなことで他の世話は邪魔されんのがよ。ちえみやあんたにはわかるかと思ったが、結局あんたもマジになってんのか？
Well, he really didn't seem all that bothered by this, but...
もう二人死んでいる。
何が珍しいんだ？
は？
あのな、人間なんざいくらでも死んでるし、俺はいくらでも片付けてる。
What? What was he talking about?
上の土砂崩れの現場見たか？ありゃ8年前に野里が手入れたら崩れてそのまんまになってる。気味悪がって片付けもしやがらねえ。作業員の死体は俺が掘り出して埋めた。
I had no idea that was such a big deal.
バカな町の奴らが山ん中で首つって獣に食われることもある。俺やおやっさんが苦労して片付ける羽目になる。皿長に死体が流れることも珍しくねえ。渓流釣りだかなんだか知らねえが、上流は危ねえっつうのによ。それでもな、誰も何もしてくれねえ。俺らとしちゃな、無縁仏で埋めてそれで終わりにしてきたこった。山っつうのは獣が出ようがムクロが出ようが何でもありなんだよ、兄ちゃん。
でも今回は村の中で。
ああ、なんだろうな。月の輪が人を食うなんざ聞かねえし、もしかして本物の狼でも群れで来たかもな。
あれが野獣の仕業だと。
人間の仕業だっつうのもどうなんだ。要は夜に番を立てりゃいい話だろうが、なぜバカみてえに殺し合う必要がある。
This person was hard to read. There was no denying he had a good head on his shoulders. He was reasonable and skeptical about the unknown. On the other hand, there were some things he put even above rationality. It felt like something you could call Yasumi's rules, or better yet, fellowship. He looked at the situation from the perspective of, I gotta protect Yasumu. He did whatever he could within those constraints, but he was in denial about the existence of enemies originating from within Yasumu. To him, the situation was just a common case of some outsiders died, so what? Or maybe that was what he really wanted to think. That made the situation very bad. But I, being an outsider, couldn't say that.
そうですよね。おっしゃる通り、そんな迷信に耳を貸す方がどうかしてます。
He looked displeased. What was I supposed to do?
ただ、ちょっと気になるんです。伝説で、今夜一晩で皆殺しになるとかなってるなら、心の持ちようが違う。
ああ、それはねえな。狼が殺すってのは一晩に一人だけのはずだ。
そうなんですか？伝説上、それはなぜだってことになってるんでしょう。
ばあちゃんなんつってたかな。誰も山の掟には逆らえん。世もつ狼様であってもだったか。
世もつ狼？
蘇った狼って意味だと。
Huh. Weird. I feel like I've heard that term before. Still, wasn't it weird that the laws applied to the wolves too? They were on the Yomibito side, as in those opposing the mountain. And I was pretty sure the law of the mountain said that only one person could be killed per day. Lynching one during the day was the limit, and killing more than one per night was against the rules. Both would make you the target of the corruption. It didn't make much sense to me, but at least I found out that the wolves too could only kill one person per night.
変なこと聞いてすみませんでした。おとなしく引っ込んでおきます。あ、男手がいるときは言ってください。勝手に手は出さないでおきますが、ここに居候してる分、働きたいんです。
ああ、そうだな。
His last reply was half-hearted, but at least I got a bit of the rules I was missing. When I came back to the dining hall, I found the students, Chamie and Yatsuga-kun, Yasunaga's little brother. Meiko had left.
うんこマンじゃない、ハッサン。うんこマン？
何それ？
The name still got a chance to spread. That aside, I had to find out what happened at today's feast. Recalling what Mochi told me, this was kind of hard.
悪いけど、ちょっとちえみちゃん借りていい？
わお、ちえみさん大人気。
だからあなたは懲りないわね。
はるちゃん、いいから僕らは母さんを手伝おう。
兄ちゃんも何か言ってよ。
多分難しい話なんだよ。
僕は皿を叩き割る係。
はるちゃん、近持くんを押さえつける係。
何よこれ。
ごめんね、なんかバタバタして。
安永くんと何を話してた？
さっきの宴でね、ちょっとまずいよねって。
Yeah, I figured it was something like that.
匠さんがヘビって名乗ったと近持くんから聞いたんだけど。
うん、そうなんだよね。
他にヘビは？
他？いや、ヘビは一人だし。
The mountain gave 4 kinds of guardians. The snake could ask the mountain whether one of the participants was a wolf or not. The monkey was the only one of which there were 2. They had the power to know who the other monkey was. The crow could determine whether the person who was lynched the previous day was a wolf or not. And the spider could ask God to protect one of the other participants from the wolf's attacks. Honestly, if this so-called God really had that power, I'd complain to him that he should protect everyone. As far as I knew, anyone who didn't have a guardian was either a powerless human or a wolf. The humans could kill a person during the day, while the wolves could kill a person during the night. It was a battle for survival. The humans had to do everything to find and kill the wolves. If they couldn't find a single wolf during the feast, the whole event was completely meaningless. The wolves would simply crush the settlement.
殺人の是非を一旦脇に置くならば、今日狼容疑者を選べなかったことは単純に一日ロスだよね。
そうだね。そのこともさっきヤス君と話してた。
そして 実質蛇の正体が確定してしまった。
うん。ちょっと嫌な状況だね。
She understood it well. We couldn't expect the help of the police or getting a forensic investigation, not to mention we were up against supernatural monsters. As things were, the snake's power was the only way to find out who was a wolf or not. In other words, losing the snake would mean losing the most powerful weapon against the wolves.
でも、多分今日は大丈夫なんだ。クモは匠兄ちゃんを守るようにってことになったから。
待って、雲もバレたのか？
ヤス君がこの場で明かせば狼にも聞かれるから秘密にしておこうって。
Sharp.
それで肝臓じいちゃんが OK 出して方針が決まったんだ。
正しそうだね。
と思う。蛇についてもそういう風にできればよかったのかな。
They really should have. It was best to secretly gather info without revealing their guardians. Especially for the snake, he should have kept quiet and used his power to find out as much as reasonably possible before revealing himself. I knew it was difficult to figure it out right away, but the fact that the snake, the most important role, was the first to be outed was really bad. From my perspective, Takumi-san had been so focused on protecting Yasumi himself that he'd made a terrible mistake. He appeared calm, but I wouldn't have been surprised if he'd realized this and was actually pretty shaken.
結果、どうなると思う？
She asked like she already knew the answer.
雲は言われるがままに匠さんを守る。当然、狼もそれを聞いているんだから、匠さんを殺そうとすれば、雲が阻むんだろう。どうやるのかは知らないが。
だね。結果、1日分の殺人権をロスする。
Jamie seemed to process this as a logic game too.
僕が狼なら、匠さんは無視して、別の誰かを殺す。
春明さんもそう思うか。ちなみに狙われるとしたら誰かな？
それはわからない。狼側の選択傾向がわからないからね。奴らが女子供の血をすすりたいとかなら、狙われるのは若い子たちだろうし。
怖い。
大丈夫。ちえみちゃんより若い子がいるから。
殺す。
大丈夫。美人狙いだったら一頭。
許す。でもそれはそれでやだな。殺される前に何されるかわかんないし。
I'm sure there were plenty of things they could conceive. Apparently there was another layer to the worst possible scenario.
趣味以外の方向で言えば、そうだな。殺すことで村人側が大きく動揺するような人物。集落の有力者。あるいは、今後のゲーム展開を左右するような優秀なプレイヤー。
肝臓じいちゃん。あるいはヤス君。
That seemed likely. Yasumizu-kun was the only one who'd done something helpful for the villagers this time. He seemed to be the leader of the high schoolers and had a good head on his shoulders. But his ideas required Kanzo Makishima's approval, or Makishimashi's approval, which made it pretty clear he was a standout. Honestly, I'd expect him to take more initiative than he had, but the fact that he considered the younger people's opinion showed real leadership skills. In any case, he wasn't someone the humans wanted to lose. Oh yeah.
匠さんが誰を調べるかは決めたの？
清之助さん。
何そのチョイス。
何って本人の希望で。あと人間関係的に不利な人から優先的に調べて安全性を上げようっていう。
I wasn't so sure about that choice. Those who were confirmed as non-wolves would have much more freedom to act. At the very least, they wouldn't be suspected as wolves who were just trying to exploit the situation during the feast. That being the case, shouldn't they have opted to choose a potential leader to investigate? Well, I didn't really know if Kinosuke Nasatoshi had the skills, but from what I could tell, he definitely lacked the influence to lead. If they wanted to secure a reliable leader, they should have went for someone like Kanzo Makishimashi. But wait.
もし蛇の対象がその夜に狼にやられてしまうなら、蛇が無駄になるか。死んだ人はカラスが調べればいいことだから。
違うよ。夜に殺されるのは狼が選ぶんだから間違いなく人間だよ。カラスはあくまで昼に宴で選ばれて殺された人の正体を知れるだけ。
あ、そうか。確かに。
Whatever the case, perhaps investigating Kinosuke wasn't that much of a mistake. Did that mean that they were actually doing a decent job? Well, it'd be pretty bad if Kanzoshi was the one to go. Jamie looked gloomy. She and I probably felt that it wasn't a complete blunder, but it still had a bad feeling about it. During the feast, everyone had to lock themselves somewhere all alone around every sunset. It was called sheltering. Well, I could understand it, considering the legends, but I'd still wondered why the students didn't go to school. It was a weekday. When I'd asked, they just told me, why would we leave when it's so dangerous? The idea that they couldn't leave when the mist was here was so popular it afflicted their daily lives. Also, the people at Kamafujiyoshi had to know that Yasumizu was covered in mist, right? Considering the school there probably had a few students to begin with, the non-presence of the three from Yasumizu would normally be a serious problem. I knew it was a settlement for the ostracized, but did they really neglect this place that badly? Looking at it from that angle, it was safe to assume that the local villagers, Kamafujiyoshi included, actually concealed the feast of the Yomi Purge. I thought about that and similar things in room 203 of the student dorm, the place I was given. Jamie had given me some cup ramen and hot water. We chatted for a moment about being neighbors for a while, then she returned to her room. Weird we could be so casual about this, considering there was a chance we wouldn't meet again tomorrow. After dinner, I took a bath. The gas boiler was pretty damn old, so learning how to use it took a while. There were some working electrical outlets too, so I could charge my phone. I didn't have a wristwatch, so that was important. By the way, my room didn't have a kitchen. I was pretty sure the other rooms didn't either. From what I could tell, no one here actually cooked or ate at their own homes. They all relied on the dining hall to provide their meals. This settlement had not only a unique culture, but a way of life as well. I couldn't help but wonder how something like this began and survived into the modern era. It was an interesting subject to research, but for now I had to worry about the fact that my life was in danger. Anyway, what were my options now? I wasn't part of the feast, but walking around at night was probably dangerous regardless. After all, I had memories of getting killed doing exactly that. From a logical standpoint, that was probably just a dream, but it had a quality to it that made it hard to believe it was. I had to be careful until I was certain. Then again, I had a record of surviving by just not making any noise at night. Maybe I should have stayed awake and looked around? Also, Takumi-san said that they were going to have someone keep watch at night, didn't he? Was he going to do it himself? Considering the snake's importance, he shouldn't do something so dangerous. Shit, they barely decided anything in the feast. I wasn't getting enough info either. I felt like I barely knew the basics. Talking during the feast meant giving info to the wolves, but if the humans kept too many things hidden, the wolves would end up knowing way more than them, and that was just dangerous. Still, there was a limit to what I could do in my situation. If I kept being the messenger I was today, I could create a huge imbalance of info myself. Not to mention I could be deemed suspicious and lose the residents' trust. Shit, what was I supposed to do here? Was it best for me just to stay quiet and wait for the feast to end? That wasn't like me at all. There was a mail slot on the door. I opened it up and looked outside. Everything was still covered in mist, so I couldn't see much. I could only see the handrail and the branches going into the hallway. And maybe I could see some intruder if I kept staring? Not likely. After all, this was the room at the end of the second floor. Hara-chan's and Chaimi's rooms were closer to the stairs, so I couldn't see anyone going to attack them. The only time I could see the monster come would be when it was coming for me. Maybe keeping watch like this was the most important thing if I wanted to stay alive, but I found it hard to put my own life on the priority list. For some reason, I felt like if I died, I'd just go back to the starting point. Yeah, I better not think that. Anyway, I had to stay awake. I still had many things to worry and think about. "5:14, Wednesday." What? As I woke up and tried to move, my head rubbed against something tough and then smacked into the doorknob. I writhed in pain. What was going on? Did I fall asleep against the door? Was I more tired than I thought? I was glad I didn't die and all, but this was a failure in my eyes. Sleeping in an unnatural position made my whole body hurt. I wobbled over to my fully charged phone. It was 6 o'clock. That was early morning for me. I'd have loved to just go back to sleep, but I was too curious about the feast. After washing my face with hot water and putting on my shoes, I decided to take a peek through the mail slot. Outside, I saw Chaimi standing there with a knife in hand. I reflexively stepped back, tripped, and fell on my ass. What the hell was that? There was a woman standing before my room with a weapon. I'd only caught a glimpse, but that was enough to conclude that I was dealing with a scene straight out of a horror movie. What could have prompted this? Did she suspect I was a wolf, or was she a wolf herself? She knocked on the door, making me squeal a bit.
春明さん、春明さん、起きてる？
Would she kill me if I replied?
春明さん起きて。他のみんなの様子を見て回るから付き合ってほしいんだ。ちなみに私は現在凶器を所持してますが、ご信用につき心配なきよう。
紛らわしい。
あ、起きてた。大丈夫大丈夫。ほら、凶器はちょっと離れたところに置きました。
I hesitantly peeked through the mail slot and saw her hopping around, showing me her empty hands. After meeting up with Chamie, we went around the dorm and woke up the students. All of them were all right. While they got ready, we went to Nasato Mansion just because it was close. Yasumizu was still misty and unpleasantly silent. I watched carefully, just like yesterday morning. I couldn't write off the possibility that a werewolf would jump out of the mist and tear me apart. It'd be over for me. I was walking ahead, dragging Chamie by the hand, careful about where I was going. If something happened and I got eaten or something, Chamie would either fight back or run away.
誰かいるのか？
あ、野里さん、夫妻子と千恵美ちゃんです。
どこだ？そこか。
We peered through the mist and a gloomy frown appeared.
いやー、どうも。
屋敷は大丈夫だったみたいですね。
当然だろう。屋敷には古臭いながらもセキュリティ設備が設けられている。化け物だろうが侵入できるとは思えんね。
そっか。じゃあみんなで避難させてもらえます？
なぜそんなことをせねばならんのかね。これは安水の問題だろう。
そっか、そうですよね。じゃあ安水の問題解決のためとっとと下に降りてます。
待ちたまえ。一緒に動かないと危険だろう。
Really, I was beginning to think that this guy was best described as all bark, no bite. Though prideful and vain, he wasn't as smart as he claimed to be, as shown by his inability to take charge of the feast. Also, his fussy attitude was probably just him making up for his fear. It was entirely possible he was just putting on an air and that the mystery of Yasumizu, or rather Fujiyoshi, was actually scaring him. Anyway, we went downhill and met up with the students.
慣れた道でも不気味なもんだね。
だね。霧って不思議だ。
これなら脱いでも怒られない。
やめろ、バカ者。
Hara Makishima was acting weird. Mochi was definitely expecting a retort from her. She didn't say anything, and her face was so pale you could tell through the mist. Hanging her head, she was lightly shaking. Everyone else could see it too, but no one chose to address it. Questions would quickly become suspicious after all. Perhaps she was a wolf and did something horrific last night? We all thought similar things. She suddenly collapsed to the ground.
大丈夫か、はるちゃん。
触らないで。
Her hoarse scream shocked everyone.
はるちゃん。
兄ちゃん、違う。ごめん。だけど、今は。
うん、そうだよね。神経質にもなるよ。足元に気をつけて。
We then slowed down. Hana-chan, not touching anyone's hands, was at the rear of the group. As we walked, trees and stones drifted in and out of visibility through the surrounding mist. Our vision was so limited it felt like the world around us was changing with every step we took. A tunnel of trees, a path on the paddy field, a stone platform, a concrete stairway. We walked between realms every passing second. I was still wondering about Hana-chan. What was on her mind? Was she afraid or wary? After descending for a bit, we arrived at the plaza.
みんな無事ね。
We met two more people in front of the dining hall.
ご老人方は朝寝坊かね。
ばあちゃんは身支度中だ。体調が良くねえらしい。これから来てねえ連中のところを回る。キヨ、お前はついてこい。
なぜ君が私に命令する？
男手がいるかもしれねえからだ。夫妻子、悪いがあんたも頼むぜ。
This was the first time he'd ordered me to do something, but it wasn't a situation where I could be happy about him relying on me.
ええ、もちろん。
He probably had a bad feeling, namely that he wouldn't be able to rely on a certain someone ever again. As I passed by Kiyori-san, I heard her whisper,
あのね、安永、ちょっといい？
何、母さん。
義継を探してほしいの。 離れにいないようだから。
Everyone probably had a bad feeling about this. The three of us guys checked the houses. Yasunuga-kun, Chaimi, and Mochi walked around the settlement. We had agreed to split up and start searching. The misty village was silent. I couldn't hear anyone chatting. I'd seen these buildings from the outside, but it was my first time actually walking in. The shabby buildings built using blackened planks were more or less buried in the vegetation. Some were on the verge of collapse. The way their frames jutted from the mist reminded me of the carcasses of giant beasts. I walked a line between the grass, a footpath surely. I often heard something small jump in the grass. It was probably just some bugs or frogs, but it still made me flinch.
リカコさんはここに住んでいるのだったか。
ああ、そこんちだ。
くそ。なんだって彼女がこんな場所に住まねばならん。
お前が知らねえんだったら俺らが知るわけねえだろうが。身車あたりの指図じゃねえのか。
私が知る限りでは彼女が休みずに移ったのは自主的とのことだがね。第一必要がない。
ひょっとしたら霧が立つんで魔除けのまじないでもしに来たんじゃねえか。無駄だったがよ。
室匠、私ならともかく彼女相手にあんまり口が過ぎるんじゃないかね。相手は上藤吉の長者の正統だぞ。
知るか、ここは安水だ。あいつ自分で言ってたろうが、宴になりゃみんな食われんだよ。
リカコさん、リカコさん、ご無事ですか？
Apparently, Takumi-san didn't like the Uematsu family, or the four head families in general. Now that I thought about it, though she wasn't as disliked as Kinosuke, the villagers in general weren't fond of Rikako Uematsu. It seemed like a pretty obvious outcome, though. Yasumizu was a settlement for the ostracized. It was impossible for a member of one of the head families who openly spurned them to form a good relationship with the locals. Rikako-san emerged before too long. She was wearing her usual strange getup, and she didn't seem any different from how she looked yesterday. We moved on to the next house. I felt like Rikako-san was urging me, so I woke up the girl.
Meiko-chan, asa da yo.
Well, I couldn't imagine Rikako-san raising her voice, while the other two probably didn't feel like they had to get involved with the girl. After a few calls, she finally came out, still half asleep.
Meiko, よかった。
キヨ、二人を食堂まで連れて行ってやれ。
リカコさん、こちらへ。足元に気をつけて。
はい。
She was apparently trying to get my attention, so I turned around and said, "Yes?"
ごめんなさい。
Her sudden apology left me completely confused. She then departed alongside the other two, leaving me alone with Takumi-san.
いいんですか？清之助さんがいなくて。
どうせ役に立たねえ。植松の坊主もどきがくたばってたら運ばせようと思ってたけどよ。もう誰がやられたか分かったから。
まだ狼じじい氏の可能性も。
適当言うな。おやっさんが生きてたら誰より早起きしてとっくに休みずを3週くらいはしてるっつうんだ。すまねえ。奥野がおやっさんの家だ。
I followed him in silence. I couldn't think of anything to say. The fact that the door was unlocked made it clear that something wasn't right. The moment I opened it, my nostrils were assaulted by a smell I'd experienced just yesterday, the reek of a fresh corpse. Unlike Takumi-san, who was looking away and cursing, I did my best to burn the scene I witnessed into my memory. I felt like to avert my eyes would be disrespectful, and chided myself for wanting to look away. The body was much more intact than Mamiya-san and Hashimoto-san's. That made it much easier to become painfully aware of the fact that this was a human, an intelligent life form who was with us yesterday like it was no big deal. There was one problem, though. The part of the body that used to be the head was completely destroyed. There was no part of the head left untouched. It was that thorough. It was obviously the result of relentless, heavy, blunt attacks. Everything above the neck was just a strange, flat mess of a shattered skull fragments and white and red organic matter. Compared to it, everything else was largely unharmed. The old-looking clothing and the unexpectedly robust chest for someone his age were all the proof needed to know that this was the body of Kanzo Makashimashi.
片付けるんですか？
当たり前だろ。
少しだけ 時間をください。
どうする気だ。
できる限りのことを調べます。
Since we had no idea when we could get out of here, protecting the scene of the crime for an official investigation meant we had to leave this body to rot here, but we just couldn't do that. And considering the horrible state it was in, the villagers probably wanted to take care of it their own way as soon as possible. Not much I could do to stop that. Thus, I did my duty as someone with such obligations. This corpse was completely unlike the ones from yesterday. While those two were destroyed completely, the damage on this one was focused on the head. The weapon clearly wasn't sharp. They'd used something blunt. The skin on his face was torn, but not sliced apart, and the skull was shattered. This was caused by repeated blunt attacks on the head. It wasn't my job to picture whether there was some profound grudge in this. The only clear thing here was that the wolves killed him using something blunt, not claws or fangs, and it was obviously done with dedicated intent, not accidentally. At the very least, the entity that made this corpse wasn't the same as the one that made the ones from yesterday. It made sense if you separated them and assumed that yesterday was the corruption and today was the wolves. But the thing I'd seen when I was walking around at night that time had the appearance of a wolf, or rather a werewolf. If the werewolves were the ones bringing the corruption, the tale all this was based on would make even less sense. If the corruption was Great Lord Shinai, the mountain god's punishment, it'd be weird for it to be delivered by the wolves. Holding back my nausea, I looked back at the corpse. Then I rolled back my sleeves and reached for the destroyed head.
おい、何を。
ないと思いますが、一応調べます。
Decapitation meant body doubles, mystery writing 101. If someone brought in and killed a person with a similar build to Kanzushi's, then left him here, his death could easily be fake.
肝臓さん、下顎に銀歯ありました？
いや、ねえよ。
His voice was strangely forced. I looked at him and realized he was kind of pale. I might have overdone it. Still, I couldn't be soft in this situation.
おやっさんは60過ぎて差し歯も何にも入れてねえの自慢してたから。あったのか？
いえ、誘導を避けるための質問です。健康な歯がびっしりですよ。
なんだよ。
The lower jaw was mostly intact, while the upper one was destroyed along with the rest of the head. Despite that, I saw a hint of the old man in the eyebrows and the dark hair with streaks of gray in them. It was pretty clear it was the one and only Kanzo Makishimishi, so it was probably pointless to keep thinking about the way he was injured. My hands were all messy. I'd have to wash them later. The corpse aside, Kanzushi was lying on some thin bedding. There was no sign of a struggle. He was either instantly killed by the first attack or knocked out, laid there, and then killed. Still, it wasn't a corpse that was easy to make. The situation here was peculiar. One point I found curious was the fact that Kanzushi surely obeyed the shelter law and locked himself in. However, the lock on the door was still perfectly intact. So, logically speaking, Kanzushi had opened the door and let the culprit in. There was no sign of resistance, so it was probably done by someone he felt safe with. However, if this was a normal killing by the standards of the Feast of the Yomi Purge, then this was definitely made possible by something unnatural. Back to the situation at hand. The futon and everything around it were bloody, obviously, but there was another strange thing about the crime scene, the dampness. Some spots were really wet, and clearly not because of the mist. It was like the murderer purposely spread some water here. They were trying to wash away the blood splatter on them, but there was no point in doing that in front of the body. The footprints were faded. Were they trying to cover their tracks? They were still pretty visible, though. It was more like they put bloody footprints on a futon and tatami that was already wet. The shape of the prints told me that they weren't made by Western shoes, Japanese clogs, or wild beasts. They were just long ovals reminiscent of those made by Zori sandals. There weren't many of them, though. Most of the blood was absorbed by the futon. But from what I had, I could tell that there was only one type of footprint.
何か分かったのかよ。
大したことは。
だろうな。あんた別にそっちの専門家じゃねえんだろう。
ええ、残念ながら。
All I knew was that the culprit was a very dangerous human. As I washed my hands, Takumi-san removed the sliding door and put Kanzo-san's remains on it. He covered his destroyed face with a nearby hand towel and prepared to carry it.
後ろ頼む。
了解です。
We lifted it up and, yeah, this was definitely a job for two people. We went out into the mist.
皿長に捨てるんですか？
ばあちゃんはそうしろって。
そうしなければ汚れると？
ああ。
a voice devoid of life. I couldn't call out to him. Pushing him any further was dangerous. I could tell by the air about him.
俺のせいだ。
どうしてです？
俺が宴でヘマやったから。
That was entirely possible. This proved he was aware of it himself. I would have said that, but it felt wrong.
僕にはよくわかりませんが、少なくとも匠さんがご自分なりにベストを尽くそうとされてるように見えますよ。
だからって失敗したら何にもならねえ。
じゃあ取り返さないとですね。これからは多分あなたが安水をまとめていくことになる。
俺には無理だ。
Well, I couldn't either. I was just an outsider, so I had no idea how to console him. Feeling powerless, we approached the dining hall. We'd passed by here and go straight for the graveyard. Tai Yamawaki-san had come out too. She was in the midst of prayer. Kiori Oribe-san was standing next to her. She looked completely out of it. Takaku Uematsu was covering Meiko's eyes and looking straight at me. Hara-chan, Kansa-san's actual granddaughter, was watching her grandfather's corpse with an intense expression. It probably wasn't good to make any assumptions here, but I couldn't help it. I felt like her expression was full not of unbearable sorrow, but of anger, hatred, and disgust. I'd never seen them have a nice chat, so I wouldn't have been surprised if they didn't see eye to eye. But still, I'd have liked it if she made a different expression, if only for this moment. I could only think that because I was an outsider who didn't know shit. It wasn't good to make assumptions. Shit. Why was I in this position? Just how much could I even learn in my position? But as it turned out, I was still underestimating the situation.
ヨシ君がどこにもいない。
We met Chamie on the way to the graveyard. She and the two high school guys were still searching, but the mist made it extremely difficult. We told her we'd join once we buried Kanzo-san and picked up our pace. The graveyard wasn't that far. Yasumizu wasn't very big. It only felt like it because of the mist, or the load. I had completely forgotten about him. He was alright too, huh? I had no idea why, but he was looking at us, clapping and laughing. That meant that Yoshitsugu Orabe-kun was the only one we hadn't seen yet. I was told there'd only be one. The wolves were supposed to kill only one person per night. Not saying a word, I hurried to finish the job. That led us to finding him early. Yoshitsugu-kun was on the shortest path to the cliff in the grass of the graveyard, though Takumi-san had only noticed him by chance. That was how deep in the grass he was, and how many pieces of him there were. It reeked of death too, but it was mixed with the smell of trampled grass and a strange, beastly odor. Maybe not all the blood around here was his. Unlike Kanzo-san, he left clear proof of a tough battle and intense pain.
Yoshi.
Oh, hold on a second. Okay.
お前根性あったよ。
Takumi-san's voice was shaking. He picked up a soccer ball-sized object. Half-eaten and basically a shadow of what it used to be, it clenched its teeth, even in death.
いいですか？
Takumi-san gave it, Yoshitsune's head, to me, and I put my finger in its mouth. I was curious about what was stuck in there. What I found was a clump of beastly fur. He literally fought tooth and nail, resisting until the very end. Resisting what? Obviously the being that brought the corruption. It didn't take long for the news of Yoshitsu's Odabe's death to spread across the village. I'd heard that the pain of losing one's child was beyond any description. Even so, Kaori Odabe-san broke down so badly it felt abnormal. The mild-mannered woman became a mad beast. We had to band up to keep her from running to where we found Yoshitsukun's corpse. We'd already gathered it up and thrown it into Sadanaga after all. Takumi-san kept a tuft of the boy's bleached hair, which he gave to Kaori-san. She instantly put it in her mouth. Through her wailing and choking, she did her best to chew and swallow it. It was a wretched, gloomy, and miserable sight, though it might have been an act born of ultimate motherly love. Whatever the case, no matter the shape, it was too late to try and bring her child back into herself, not to mention the absurd and pointless. That was how it looked in my eyes.
宴をしよう。おやっさんとよしをやったやつをどうにかしないと。
His words got the attention of basically everyone present, but they didn't reach the sobbing mother and her older son, who was gently consoling her. Yoshitsugu-kun. Why did he have to go against the laws? His efforts and death had only worked to corner not just his mother, but everyone else here. It was useless. He'd gotten some weird fur for us? No one, not even me, had any doubts about what we were dealing with here. A situation where everyone was desperate, acting on their own accord, and didn't know how to use their lives well was basically the worst. And apparently, this line of thinking I'd had would foreshadow the next turn of events. Shit, why was everyone in such a hurry to do the worst things possible? Chiemi Seruzawa, Chikmochi Kamoshiro, Takumi Muro, and I went out to search for Haru Makimishima. I don't know why they have to use full names here. You can just use the last name or the first name. Oh, wow, the Japanese language is so strange. Kiori-san showed... See, they just said Kiori. Oh, whatever. Kiori-san showed no sign of calming down, so Yasunuga-kun stayed with her. Kiyonosuke refused to come, arguing that it would be bad if there wasn't enough manpower around the dining hall, and he wasn't wrong about that. It wasn't unlikely that some fur-covered murderer, or Haru-chan's kidnapper, was still around. To prevent any surprise attacks or accidents, we split into pairs. We were given a hoe and a sickle for self-defense.
気をつけてね、二人とも。
やばいことになったら全力で叫べ。低く大きい声でな。
了解です。よろしくな、モッチー。
キリキリ働くぞ、ハッサン。
The skirt would have made the search harder for him, so he changed into his school uniform. I wasn't cut out for the job either, but he had no other clothes. At least it was better than the one-piece dress. He seemed to enjoy wearing girls' clothing, so changing into the uniform was probably his way of showing he was serious about this. He kept his easygoing tone of voice, but I felt like there was gravity in his eyes, too. He might have been pretty shaken.
Haru-chan!
Haru-chan!
We walked around Yasumizu, shouting until our throats became dry. We checked every bush, all the patches of tall grass, and behind every tree. We even searched the water around the paddy fields, but it didn't feel like we were getting any closer to finding her.
彼女はどうしたと思う？
わからん。自分のじっちゃんが死んでショックだったのかも。
いや、その前だ。朝から何かおかしかったろ。
そうだっけ？
彼女、ちょっと潔癖症なところがある？
潔癖？
汚いものとか行為とか、そういうのを嫌う感じ。最初に会った時からそんな感じはあったかと思うんだけど。
というか、Yasumizuで一番怖がりなんだよね、はるちゃん。
Scaredy cat, huh?
昔話の汚れとか、 昔からすごく怖がってたし、ある意味汚れるのを嫌がってたのかも。
なるほど。
Fear based on superstition? That made sense, but why had it suddenly gotten worse? What happened last night?
だからはるちゃんが狼でも誰も殺したりできないと思うんだな。
君はそう考えてるのか？
はるちゃんが狼かどうかは別として、もし狼でも無理だろうって言っておる。
慎重だな。君らしくもない。
僕自身のことじゃないからね。
君とまで腹芸をやりたいわけじゃないんだ。はるちゃんについて何か考えがあるなら言ってくれないか？
何を疑ってるのか僕には分からんけど、僕ん中でははるちゃんはやっすんと同じかそれ以上に大事なもので、それ以外何にも大事じゃないんだよね。だからとっとと探そうよ。
正論だ。
No matter how hard we searched, we saw no sign of her. She could have been hiding somewhere, or maybe she'd collapsed. But I was beginning to entertain another idea.
彼女が休みずを出た可能性は？
I asked, knowing everyone would deny the idea.
相当考えにくいけど。
霧の休みずは黄泉の国とつながってんだってばあちゃんは言ってる。だから出ようとしてもあっちに迷い込むだけだと。
まああと単純に危ないよね、山の中は。
その心情は承知した上で聞きますが、それでもあえて彼女が村を逃げ出したとした場合、彼女にどんな心境の変化があったと考えられる？
Everyone fell silent. They couldn't even imagine it. It was like their brains had stopped working. If she'd actually wandered out into danger, then we'd wasted too much time searching for her in the village. I had to hurry, so I didn't hesitate to use some big assumptions that bordered on chicanery.
彼女にとってこの村が、あるいは人が、もはや信頼できる場でないとすれば？
どういうこと？
深夜あるいは早朝に彼女は何かを目撃したのかもしれません。あるいは何らかの証拠に気づいたのかも。自分のよく知る人物が狼になって人を平然と殺した。その事実を確信できるような何かにね。
Everyone gasped.
彼女は若いし不安定なところもある。休みずは狭い社会だから、心の拠り所が失われれば居場所がないように感じられてもおかしくないし、苛烈な性格であるハルちゃんなら一念発起して脱出を試みるなんてことも考えられるんじゃないか？
説得力あるな。
しかしならどうする？諦めろっつうのか？
That was the thought of someone from Yasumizu.
僕は汚れてもいいからはるちゃんを探しに行く。
That was the thought of someone from Yasumizu who had a few screws loose.
そんなわけで外出に抵抗感のないよそ者である僕も行きます。
だからそれ止めるって言ったよね。
大丈夫。ヤバそうだったらすぐ引き返す。あるとすれば皿長方面のはずないから、通学路側を探すことにする。それに大人が子供を見捨てるわけにはいかんでしょというやつで。
ハッサン。
反論しようがないよ、そんなの。
もちろん彼女がまだ休みずにいる可能性は十分ある。二人は引き続き集落内を探していただけますか？
任せてくれ。
危なかったら絶対逃げてよ。
ハッサン、さっき言ってた話さ。
ん？どれ？
はるちゃんが何かを見たから誰も信じなくなって逃げたって話。
うん。それが？
多分本当じゃないよね。
さあ、僕はあくまで可能性として言ったに過ぎないが、本当かもしれないとは思ってるよ。
例えば僕ややっすんが牙とか生やしてうろついてるのを見たとか？
まあそれも可能性だね。
なんていうかそうじゃない気がする。
ただの勘かい？
そう、ただの勘だけど、それで言えばこの読み意味の宴ってさ、そういう方法で狼を見つけらんないようにできてる気がする。
夜出歩けないから目撃ができない。一箇所に固まって相互監視もできない。警察を呼べないから科学捜査も無理。おまけに全部霧の中で何が何だかわからないうちにことが進んでいく。だからそういう証拠とかじゃ 狼を見つけられない。
How could the player send people to be hanged without the slightest bit of material evidence? If you ignored the weird guardian powers, it was all quibbles, agitation, sophistry, emotional arguments, connections, popularity, basically the power of communication.
よくわからんけど、そんな感じでちゃんとできてるんじゃない？
Nothing was certain. They were put in a dangerous argument, with their only weapon being their eloquence. It was a feast of doubting, hurting, and eventually killing one another. If there was such malice behind this, then Chikmochi Kamoshida had a point.
もしや君は探偵タイプなんじゃないの？
え？いやー、それは休んだな。もしかしたら、奴はもういろいろわかってるかもしれないぞ。
I'd have to have a talk with him then. We arrived at the mountain pass separating Yasumizu from the rest of the world. The large stones at the sides were like torii without a top. They might have had religious significance.
別にここから一歩でも出たらアウトなんてルールはないよね。
宴から逃げちゃダメだっていうのはあるけどね。
We were going out to find Hara-chan, so we were good. Ignoring the fact that Hara-chan was breaking that law, we passed between the stones. But we soon had to stop. All right. And since we had to stop, why don't we stop it here as well? This is Audapostrophe, and you've been watching Raging Loop, running on the PlayStation 5, although obviously this is the PlayStation 4 version. Yeah, at this point in time, I think if you really thought about it, you'd have enough clues about who the wolves are and who the humans are. So I don't know, what are your best guesses? Like I said, there's already a lot of information, at least in this loop. Obviously, we've had a death loop already, so we're more likely to have many more death loops, depending on what goes on here. But like I said, if you're really paying attention, then you already know who the wolves and who the humans are by this point. And if not, then you get to enjoy the mystery, because there's certainly more of that going on. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed watching. I will see you at the next stream.